welcome to The Crossroads. I'm your host, Angela Rajniganda. So today I want to explore the demons and dark entities that many people would consider evil. There are many things like Baphomet and Lucifer and Beelzebub that immediately trigger fear, while others like angels and spirit guides bring comfort. But my question is, are these entities and beings really ever actually inherently good or evil? As humans, we typically have this need to sort things into categories: good or evil, safe, unsafe, light, dark. And this is very survival-based thinking. The mind wants to know what to approach and what not to approach. And over time, religion and culture has taken this survival instinct and turned it into something very, very absolute. And instead of thinking, well, this is unfamiliar, proceed carefully, it's become, well, this is evil, it's bad, it's dark. And instead of, feeling that something feels comfortable and familiar, say, oh, this is holy, this is good. But that's not as much truth as it is about control. Anything unknown gets pushed into fear, and anything emotionally comforting or just familiar to us gets elevated into something sacred. But what gets missed in this process is how much of it has shaped our collective agreement about these things. If enough people agree that something is dangerous or holy, then that belief starts to stick in the human mind. And it becomes harder to separate the original experience from everything that it has been projected onto it. And I think this is where a lot of the confusion starts, because people often assume that their emotional reaction to something is the same as objective reality. So discomfort gets labeled as evil, familiarity gets labeled as good, but those are just not the same thing. But I think there's this other layer to this idea I have that these symbols and names and certain figures and entities can collect meaning over time. Not an intellectual meaning, but an emotional residue that comes from repeated human experience and beliefs and ritual, fear, devotion, violence, shame, rebellion. And it's almost like things become charged through use, through the way we use it. Collective human attention and emotion tends to stick to whatever they're focused on. And a good example of this might be the symbol of Jesus Christ. In many contexts, his image is associated with love, of course, and forgiveness, protection, and divine goodness and divine truth. But for a lot of people, that same image of Jesus Christ carries a completely different emotional weight: shame and guilt and fear and religious trauma. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with the figure of Christ. It's just a reflection of how this image has been used by institutions or authority structures, and even within family systems for control. His image becomes layered with human experience, not just his original meaning and intent. And if that can happen with something or someone as sacred as Christ, then this raises the broader question about everything else. Maybe some of these other entities that we consider dark or bad or evil went through a similar process. Instead of being associated with primarily their original meaning and intent, over time they've become known for how their image has been used by people or groups or institutions. And over time, this projection starts to feel like the symbol itself. The emotional charge sticks to it. The collective reaction to the symbol or being becomes part of its identity, and it's corrupting the symbol's original intent. You can also see this in the symbol of the pentagram. The pentagram has been used by numerous spiritual paths, even by Christians in medieval times. But the use of the symbol in occult and satanic practices has changed the way that people view it. Instead of feeling the symbol's original intent, many people only see the darker ways that it's been used. So now I want to share with you an instance where I experienced this firsthand in my experience working with Baphomet. You all know the image of Baphomet, the scary goat-headed deity that's often used by satanic cults and things like that. And I never intentionally set out to work with Baphomet. I had no desire to work with him, but he came to me. For a good week, I was seeing his image out of the corner of my eye, standing in the corner of the room, and I would see him when I'd walk past a mirror, just a flash of him in the reflection of the mirror. And it was really scary. And I was thinking, oh shit, well, this can't be good. And so I'm calling all my guides and my protectors, and I'm trying to clear him away and whatever, trying to clear this bad thing out of my life. And it's just not working. I just keep seeing him when I close my eyes at night in my room constantly. And so I decided to journey on it. I go talk with my guides and I ask for their help because I'm thinking that I'm under some sort of serious attack here. And so I journey. I go talk with them and I ask them what's going on. I tell them I need help. And they tell me, no, you're not under attack. He just wants to talk to you. He's just trying to get your attention. And I'm like, what? They say it's fine. You're safe. And I say, okay, but you guys stay with me because I wasn't doing that alone. And so he approached. I let him approach in my journey. And something that's interesting when I'm speaking with different beings when I'm journeying, sometimes it is like physically speaking to them. Other times it's more telepathic. And sometimes the language that comes through is what I can understand, or I can understand it. But there's other times where it's an entirely different language that I don't understand, even if it's telepathic, which is kind of strange because you think if it was telepathic, it would always just translate. But even then, for some reason, sometimes it doesn't translate. I don't really know why. But anyway, I couldn't understand him. I couldn't hear and gather what he was trying to tell me. And so I had my guides translate for him and, explain what he wanted. And so when he approached me, they told me that he wanted to help me on my spiritual path and with my awakening and all. And this was years ago that this happened. And I was like, oh, sure. Thinking that he was trying to trick me or something like that. And they said that he wanted to do a healing for me. And I'm still like, no way. It's a trap. It's a trick. But then he started just swinging his massive hooves over my head. And it was so scary. It was terrifying. And I was like, oh, hell no. But then my guides chimed in like, no. It's okay. He's doing the healing. And they said, well, we're right here with you. You're safe. You're protected. And so I just stopped for a minute and I tapped into his energy. And I really, really felt him. And that's when I saw him, his true essence, his true being. And I saw him just as him, just a being, just an energy, fairly neutral, not good, not bad. But then after that, I saw all the ways in which he and his image have been used by people in these dark ways. And that energy was sticking to him. It was kind of tainting his energy. Like he's being misused himself, even abused by these people that are doing dark deeds in his image. But it wasn't him. It wasn't him. It was the people. And so after seeing that, I said, you know what? Okay, let's do this. I know I'm protected. I know I'm safe. Let's just see. Let's just explore this. And so I let him do his healing. And he continued to clear my crown chakra, which is what he was trying to do, waving his scary hooves over my head. And then he cleared my palm chakras. He put these crystals into my palms, and he was helping to clear the channels for taking energy in and sending energy out. And what he was wanting to do was to strengthen my healing abilities as a healer. And it was just crazy. It was not like anything I've experienced before or would have ever expected. And this is things like my guides have done for me, but for a symbol like Baphomet to want to do that was so unexpected. And that was truly what he was doing. There was no ulterior motive that I could see, that I could even feel, and I'm pretty good at sensing that out. And so I did meet with him a few times after that. Still being very cautious though. I was still worried, that maybe it was a trick or something. But honestly, there was nothing negative about it. And that it was all just my preconceived ideas of him that made me fearful. It wasn't his energy or anything that he was doing. And after a while, like I did stop working with him after a while because, and it was only just a few meetings that I worked with him, but I found him really difficult to work with. He, in my experience, is very animalistic. He acted very much on instinct, and he didn't understand social norms or customs. Like, he would just show up anytime I was journeying and just get right in my face, kind of like a dog would do, just jumping right on you, wanting my attention, wanting to work with me. And even if I wasn't there to work with him, I was doing something else, he would just start getting in my face. He didn't understand, politeness, that kind of a thing. And he didn't understand boundaries. And he would start doing clearings like he was doing, waving his hooves over my head without asking or without explaining first, without communicating. And his animalistic-like behavior was kind of like a dog, how they would sniff at you, and stuff like that, and even like crotch sniffing and like just that kind of thing. And it's not dark, it's not evil, it's not sexual, it's much like a dog. It's just what they do. But it's very uncomfortable. And so what I did was I set really firm boundaries with him, with the help of my guides. And I told him I would never work with him alone. I always called in my angels, my guides, even Jesus when I was working with him. And I set rules. If he wanted to speak with me, he would have to wait off to the side until I was ready to call him over. He can't just come and get in my face the second I start journeying. No coming to me in the mirrors and my dreams and when I close my eyes, things like that. That was intrusive. And that he must tell my guides and me what he wanted to do before he did it. He can't just start. He needs that permission first. And he really did try to respect those rules. And it was, I don't know, it's kind of sweet the way he tried. Just like a dog, you're trying to train a dog, they try, but sometimes their animalistic behavior just gets the best of them. And so I had to constantly remind him and constantly correct him. And ultimately, I just found it too difficult, too tedious to work with him. Even though his healings were genuine, they were good, it just wasn't working. And so I stopped, and he's respected that. He hasn't tried to invade my personal space again, hasn't tried to force it. And that's an important thing to remember when you're working with guides, too, is that you may come across a guide that you just don't like working with, and that's okay. It's okay to say no thank you to working with this person or being, and to request someone else. It's not like you're going to miss out on some really important healing or something because you'll receive it in another way. It's okay if you don't like working with a specific being that comes to you. Even if they're like an assigned guide or an angel or whatever. It's about you and your choice and your comfort. Because I'm going off on a different rant here, but our souls and spirits are so multifaceted that I've likely worked with beings like Baphomet before in another lifetime. That's why he recognized me. That's why he wanted to come through to work with me, even though I maybe don't work in that area as much anymore. And maybe it doesn't fit my style now or whatever, I likely had a connection with him before, and that's why he was coming in. But if that's not who I am now, that's not the road I want to go down, that's totally okay. And it's the same for you guys. If you're working with a being, you don't like working with them, just don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. But so anyway, this experience with Baphomet really taught me a lot. And while he's still not someone I really feel aligned to work with, I can see that he isn't some evil, dark being that wants to hurt you or anything like that. And that he actually does want to do some good. He wants to help. But I think he's so bogged down with all the energy that's projected onto him. And I think that's just so interesting. And it's almost a human kind of thing, the way that you want to do good, but you're bogged down with trauma or with things like that, that keeps you in a low vibration and a lower place. And so after this experience, I started to just reject the idea that any single entity is either good or bad. Another way that I've kind of thought about this is that what we call these entities, they might not have these fixed personalities like humans have. They may be closer to kind of patterns of energy, archetypes, intelligences, frequencies, or even mirrors for our own consciousness that mirrors ourselves back to us in different ways. And this is where psychology and spirituality start to overlap. Carl Jung talked about projection, the shadow and the archetypes, and where the parts of the psyches that are not consciously integrated get experienced as external forces or these figures possibly. And that framework, what these people are calling demons, can sometimes just represent the disowned parts of ourselves rather than literal external evil beings. And in a lot of occult or esoteric traditions, there's also this idea that entities are not moral in a human sense. They don't sit in that same framework of good versus evil. Instead, they are described more like these forces of nature, these teachers, these embodiments of specific aspects of the consciousness. And when you start stacking all of that together, it just raises a question about whether we're actually seeing entities or whether we're just interacting with something that's more like a spiritual ecology made up of layered meanings, projections, and intelligences. And this is where the nature analogy starts to kind of tie in. In nature, there are parasitic relationships, symbiotic relationships, predatory relationships. You know, a mosquito will feed on our blood. A lion kills its prey. A parasite will attach to its host. And none of these things are morally evil. It's just their nature. So the question becomes, what if these spiritual interactions function in a similar way? Not necessarily benevolent or malevolent, just according to what they are, according to their nature. There's a difference between something being harmful and something being evil. Just because, something is predatory does not mean they're malicious. Those are not the same thing. And on the other side, not everything that feels comforting is automatically safe either. Comfort can be familiarity. Familiarity can come out of conditioning. So even our emotional reactions aren't always reliable indications of whether something is actually good, bad, what it is. And so when we use the word evil, it often becomes a catch-all for things that feel threatening, confusing, or painful. But sometimes that's actually just the surface reaction to something more complex underneath. And so coming back to that original question, are entities inherently good or evil? Because the more I look at it, the more it feels like humans may be projecting far more onto these spiritual symbols than we realize. Not just meaning, but our emotion and our trauma and our fear or our devotion, our history with it. It's all layered on top of something that may have been originally far more neutral or at least far more complex than our little categories will allow. And over time, these layers build up. Collective emotion, collective belief, repeated use, repeated intention, repeated interpretation. The symbol stops being just what it is, and it becomes a container for everything that people have poured onto it. And then we start reacting to those layers as if it's the thing, the entity itself. And that kind of changes the question entirely, because then it's not just about whether something is good or evil, and it's more about our relationship with it. And that's all I have on that. That's just my thoughts on good and evil and entities. And I'd be interested to know what you think too, if you've experienced entities as true evil or pure good, or if it's just not that simple. And I've done previous episodes on whether I believe evil even exists at all, or if it is just the absence of love and empathy, things like that. I may not have actually fully landed on an opinion there, but I'd be really interested to know what you think. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me. If you'd like to book an appointment with me for a reading or a healing session, you can do that on my website, angelarajniganda.com. And for deeper, ongoing work, exclusive episodes, please join the Shadowlight Tribe over on Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye. Hi, welcome to The Crossroads. I'm your host, Angela Rajniganda. So today I want to explore the demons and dark entities that many people would consider evil. There are many things like Baphomet and Lucifer and Beelzebub that immediately trigger fear, while others like angels and spirit guides bring comfort. But my question is, are these entities and beings really ever actually inherently good or evil? As humans, we typically have this need to sort things into categories: good or evil, safe, unsafe, light, dark. And this is very survival-based thinking. The mind wants to know what to approach and what not to approach. And over time, religion and culture has taken this survival instinct and turned it into something very, very absolute. And instead of thinking, well, this is unfamiliar, proceed carefully, it's become, well, this is evil, it's bad, it's dark. And instead of, feeling that something feels comfortable and familiar, say, oh, this is holy, this is good. But that's not as much truth as it is about control. Anything unknown gets pushed into fear, and anything emotionally comforting or just familiar to us gets elevated into something sacred. But what gets missed in this process is how much of it has shaped our collective agreement about these things. If enough people agree that something is dangerous or holy, then that belief starts to stick in the human mind. And it becomes harder to separate the original experience from everything that it has been projected onto it. And I think this is where a lot of the confusion starts, because people often assume that their emotional reaction to something is the same as objective reality. So discomfort gets labeled as evil, familiarity gets labeled as good, but those are just not the same thing. But I think there's this other layer to this idea I have that these symbols and names and certain figures and entities can collect meaning over time. Not an intellectual meaning, but an emotional residue that comes from repeated human experience and beliefs and ritual, fear, devotion, violence, shame, rebellion. And it's almost like things become charged through use, through the way we use it. Collective human attention. Thank you for joining me at The Crossroads. Visit me at angelarajniganda.com and connect on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and please join my Patreon for more exclusive content that I don't share anywhere else. Please note that this podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not professional advice. Remember, there is a time for love and light, and there is a time for raising hell. Until next time, I'll meet you at The Crossroads.